First and foremost, I'd like to introduce my colleagues, and they can tell you a little bit about themselves. We have the good fortune of some people that really understand, the term that was used in the last panel was look this subject holistically, and looking at it from a value standpoint as well as from a control standpoint and a risk standpoint. So first panelist to my right is David Escalante from Boston College. I'll let him tell you a little bit about his function and some of his philosophy.
Some of my philosophy.
Well, we can get to that later.
I'm in charge of computer security at Boston College, and I'm also in a group called the Higher Education Information Security Council, and we work on security and higher education in general across mostly the United States, although there are some people from outside the United States or outside North America. So I get exposure to a wide variety of security issues in higher education and was in industry prior to that.
Next colleague is John Schramm from Fidelity. I've known John from my previous life before Brandeis. And John, you want to introduce yourself and describe your role at Fidelity?
Sure. Thanks, Dennis. And as I said, John Schramm, head of Enterprise Information Security for Fidelity. My role is primarily policy and standards from information security and risk management standpoint for the firm. Communications training and awareness around those policies and practices, metrics and governance for the information security and risk programs across the firm. Was actually brought into Fidelity a little after a press incident with an HP laptop. I don't know if some of you might have seen that. Was brought in to sort of raise awareness around the firm regarding security practices and implement things like Grc, which is governance, risk, and control framework, policies and controls for the firm. So that's been my role. My philosophy is you can pretty much secure anything if you have enough money. And the hard part comes when you don't have enough money to secure things and you have to make decisions and risk trade-offs. I see security as just another business decision that needs to be made, like going into a new market, like being in a new geography. And businesses are just really starting to get their head around sort of factoring that into the decision-making process. And I think that's an indication we're getting to a mature state in the area, in the specialization, and it's a good sign. I don't think we're quite there yet, and we keep throwing new technologies at it every day to test it, and it doesn't quite work as smoothly as we'd like, but that's part of the process.
And our third panelist is not a security person. He doesn't even play one on TV. But he is a serial entrepreneur, has been in IT for a long time, and done some really innovative things. And I invited him to kind of work in some of his experiences as a CIO and also some of the innovations that they're doing right now. So I'll let Bill Sidwell introduce himself.
Bill Sidwell. I'm CEO of a company called Mobiquity, which is a professional services firm that helps companies identify their high-impact, high ROI global opportunities, and then we work with them to help implement them, deploy them, develop them, architect them. Been in technology, as Dennis says, for a lot of years, and had the chance to be an executive and on boards of a number of different technology companies. So along the way, I've tried security a couple of times. I was CEO of a company called Log Matrix. That was a security company that had a product around compliance and one around log management. And then as COO of Cambridge Technology Partners and CEO at Zephyr and CEO of Mobiquity, I was charged with creating and launching and providing oversight of our security practices. So as Dennis says, I am not a security guy, but at Cambridge we were charged with helping companies implement their first dose of client-server technology and help them think through the innovation that could offer. And at Zephyr, we were the first strategy-led internet services firm, and so we help companies think through how they could innovate and transform their business models using internet technology. And in Mobiquity, we're about doing the same thing around mobile technology. So all those things are all about the trade-off between security and innovation. I think that's what Dennis invited me to be a part of this.
Thank you. Okay. In the previous panel, we heard that innovation was practical creativity. It had purpose. It was different, it was novel, it adds value, and that the security function is typically if innovation is function, the security is dysfunction. It's blocking what we can't control. It's focusing too much on security and regulations and availability. I wouldn't even liken, or I wouldn't even describe the body part it was likened to. But
let it go, Dennis. Come on, it's okay. They still love you.
I know. But then it was a major constraining factor. And so with that as a segue, we like to think of ourselves as enablers. Okay, in the security space, we like to think about. There was a metaphor someone used once. They said security is like the brakes in your car. The function is to slow you down, but the purpose is to allow you to go fast. Okay, so and then if you think about it, that it's interesting. You think of brakes. Why do you have brakes in the car? It's to allow you to go fast. So with that in mind, I'll ask Dave Escalante first. What are some of the things that you try to do at Boston College to enable Boston College to do the things it needs to innovate in learning, teaching, and scholarship, and the athletic program, and the various functions that matter to the university?
Well, I think the important thing to think about in terms of security isn't necessarily that it's trying to stop you from doing things. It's trying to stop other people from doing things. Most of the things that we use or do or whatever, you go like, oh, if I only had something that would do this, it would be great. And it's true, you have something that will do this and it's great. But if somebody else does something, or if the thing breaks and suddenly you're falling 35,000 feet, or you're crashing into a wall because the car doesn't have brakes or something, that's a bad thing. And security is sort of what is going to happen when something goes wrong, more than the disabler or something like that. And if you're thinking about it as a disabler or as a business impediment or something, that's not really where you want to be. So most of the time when we get brought into security discussions, it's let's try to figure out what you're doing and what could go wrong, rather than even talking about security per se, and then how can we protect or stop against the things going wrong, because if things go wrong, other bad things can happen besides security problems. We can get sued, or the thing won't be successful, something along those lines.
So we're professionally paranoid.
Yeah.
Professionally paranoid. John, how about at Fidelity? I mean, there's certainly a pressure for large corporations to incorporate mobile technology and cloud computing and everything else, but at the end of the day, you still have to prevent risk or mitigate risk for the corporation. What are some of the things you do architecturally to make it easier for Fidelity to do things right?
Well, I joked about being professionally paranoid, but I think that part of the job description, they ask you a few questions. If you're dysfunctionally paranoid about things, they decide you should work in that group. So you must have fit the profile at some point in time. Some of the things that we do, I think, are a lot of experimentation. I don't know how much you know about Fidelity, but Fidelity is a large group of very different companies. We have portfolio companies. So you probably know the defined benefits, health and benefit company. You know Fidelity.com. You know the brokerage company. You may not know we have a tomato farm. You may not know we're an energy provider. We have a biotechnology company. We have a telecommunications company, hotel chain, delivery service. So we have different security models that exist within the enterprise. Some of those we can use to experiment with. So new technology comes out, may not be ready for the brokerage company. We may put it in one of the other companies to try it out. And we have a little thing called FCAT that one of my friends runs, and they do a lot of experimentation with new technologies. So they're constantly watching what's going on in the market. And what we may have interest from a funds perspective in watching for companies, not that we're going to necessarily invest in, but that we want to know what the leading technologies are. So you have a research function, you can pull some of that data into the process, and we do a lot of proof of concepts and pilots, and then some of them, like the application that you have on your iPhone from Fidelity, make it to prime time, and we try, when we get a business value proposition that we can go forward with. So, I think there's all different types of things. We're doing a lot of things that never see the light of day to understand the security model. We've been doing cloud computing. I tell people we've been doing cloud computing for years, but now it's sort of mainstream. We need to have more policies and practices and patterns that are around the cloud computing processes that meet the security regulatory requirements. And that's one of the real challenges when you get these things to a very robust, scalable point where you can use them across the bigger businesses. That's a little bit harder to do. But we do have things like market data that run on cloud computing infrastructure. They can definitely get there. We just need to be able to develop the appropriate amount of resource and analysis to get it to that maturity level.
Bill, you've been innovating in information technology for probably 4 decades now. And from mainframe technology to client-server technology, now with Mobiquity and the mobile technology, how do you balance getting things to market quickly, innovating, making things more complicated, and at the same time trying to do that in a way that doesn't put the users of your technology at risk?
Maybe I could comment about the metaphor that you use around the brakes first of all, because I think a lot of the backlash people get in security is because it feels like some mid-level IT guy's working the brake, and he has no idea where you're going or how you're trying to get there. Mm-hmm. And so there's not that sense that it's tied in with any of the business decisions to define what the risks are. So a lot of times at Cambridge, through Zephyr, through Mobiquity, we get called in not to figure out how to secure the application, the solution. We get called in to help figure out how we can get around the IT people who are unnecessarily placing roadblocks in the way. And the way to do that is to my belief is to make sure that the IT guys in security don't see their job as saying no. They see their job, as I see it, is to really implement the controls after the business people or whoever the people are that are appropriately positioned can understand the risks and make the appropriate decisions about the risk profile. And then their job isn't to say no, their job is to implement the controls that enable you to manage and measure that, because they change all the time and put that in place. So if you get that balance between a risk conversation versus a security conversation, then it becomes easier to understand the trade-offs between what you can't do and why you can't do it and when you should.
Okay. We know as security people, though, what typically happens, and somebody made the analogy earlier, the technology comes out faster than anybody can really effectively assimilate it into the organization. And we feel like we're trying to bolt on controls after the fact, after the things are already out there. Are we destined to repeat that ad nauseum going forward, or is there any way that we can work building security as a feature into new products and services before they actually get deployed? And we'll do this in reverse order. Bill, we'll start with you.
We're absolutely doomed to repeat that. And I think it's because if I'm an attacker, I will tend to attack assets that have value.
Right.
And if there's a new technology that is being used as an experiment or being used in a laboratory, and it's not doing anything important yet, and it's not capturing or transporting any key important information, why would I attack that? And so early on in a new technology, when it has those characteristics, I think the users get a sense of comfort and complacency that suggests that nothing's going to happen because nothing happened yet because it's not important yet. And then what happens is attackers see that, and feeling invulnerable is sort of the rocket fuel, I think, of people who are going to go after that from an attack standpoint. You know, if you look at mobile, it's a powerful operating system, a lot of functionality, so it has a lot of the same issues that many general purpose computers have, but it's also designed for personal use, and it's designed for communication. It's also portable, so it's easy to get lost. And it's also very easy to connect into networks. I think something like 81% of people who have devices in the workforce connect to their network and do it without their employees' permission, and 58% do it every day. So the risks are higher with that, but because there haven't been any public attacks around mobile, The panels I think we had here last year, it wasn't a significant issue.
Right.
But now, a year later, something like 65% of IT organizations are reporting a significant attack from mobile each week that they need attention with. So I think we're doing repeated because it starts out being unimportant. You don't see the attack, becomes important, there is attack, and then you need to retrofit.
I mean, is it the classic Nolan Norton sigmoid curve where as things are in their ascendancy, we want to make it as easy as possible for adoption, and then when we suddenly realize something is important, that's when we try to slap on the control?
Exactly, bingo. That's what I believe.
Yeah. John, how do you deal with that in a place like Fidelity? And I know when I was at Thomson, our bane was airplane magazines. The most senior executives, whatever they'd read about that week in the airplane magazine was what they wanted to attach to our network the following week. And there was no thought, no planning, no anything. And then we were asked to try to secure that. Do you experience that, not just from your executives, but also from your customers?
Yes, and we have another little factor in this, which is what things are the family bringing in? Because
that's right.
Fidelity's a private company, so we have family resources to deal with, and those can be very interesting. And you have to say yes, because they pay us.
This is therapy. This is all right.
But those can be some of the most interesting because they usually show up maybe even earlier than release sometimes.
They're not just any family; they're rich family.
We learn a lot from that process, and we learn a lot from the relationships with our vendors too. Because as products come out, we tend to get them maybe a little earlier than some other folks. Maybe through the FCAT labs as they try to understand the marketability of the products, so we get a little bit of lead time to experiment with some of these things. That said, it's still a race like with any other company to get something to a mature state where you can really put your name behind it, put the name of the firm behind it. We have some great people that do things like application security analysis and pen testing. Internally, we have probably a bigger practice in that area than a lot of the financial institutions. Definitely bigger than our size to be able to get things out faster. We have a lot more folks in the architecture and engineering spaces that are more knowledgeable in the security practices so that they can spot some of these things in advance. Are we doomed to repeat the cycle? Yes, definitely, but I think there's some things you can do. You can make some investments to make that a little faster of a cycle. Get things on the street faster that are more secure by really focusing on it as a repeatable process. That's where some of the things that I do come in for the firm to making everybody aware of what their obligation is. 100,000 eyes are better than one set of eyes or one group looking at it. If everybody's sort of looking at things, how could this impact the firm? What are the risks? And letting us know of those things, and we might spot things earlier and get more visibility. So it is quite challenging. We have traditionally done a good job of getting new technologies out on the street. It gets harder and harder to do that as we have more consumerization of IT. Makes it much more challenging now. So we just need to re-engineer some of those processes to work with containers and data protection as opposed to trying to secure the endpoint. That we're almost giving up on that side of it. So.
David, how about at BC? I mean, you have a world-class professional athletic program. A lot of research and innovation that goes on. Students pushing the envelope. Development offices always want to employ new ways of bringing funding into the university. How do you balance that? I mean, how do you, when somebody approaches you with a novel new idea, what is your reaction to it, and how do you kind of shepherd them in the direction that you want them to go?
Horror.
Horror?
We had a good hockey weekend. Generally speaking, all of the different parts of a university, a big research university, are almost like different parts of a conglomerate or multinational enterprise or something, because as Dennis said, they're doing so many different kinds and types of things, and I'll tell you a couple of things, sort of like on the good guy and the bad guy side, as opposed to just answering the question. So, being like a middle-level IT bad guy, there were some people who were introducing a new product a couple of weeks ago, and it was a thing to push reports out to the devices of senior executives. And we sort of got wind of it and did the no thing. And the reports aren't going out to senior executives, and that caused lots of consternation in lots of places. And the reason this was happening is because the people who had been developing these reports had built the whole system and discovered this glitch where the reports wouldn't load properly. And they figured out a way to make them load properly. And the way to make them load properly was to turn off a switch that said if the server on the other end tells you not to save a sensitive document, save it anyway. And that was part of the implementation. You went to the logon page to get your reports, and it said if your reports don't work, run this little thing and it's going to flip this switch and then your reports will all work fine. And we just said, what's the switch do? And they told us, and we were like, this is not a good idea. The reports may be sensitive. There may be other things people get from other systems that are sensitive. This is just a big fat no. And in investigating it, it turned out they had been working on this report system for 2 years. And they had actually had this quote-unquote glitch fix for 2 years. And maybe at some point somebody was just doing some development and said, I'm not going to worry about it now. I'm just going to put in this little patch and it's going to work. But somehow that got carried all the way over to like a couple days before production. That's not the right way to work with your security people. It's not the right way to do security. It is the right way to think the security people are a bunch of jerks who are wrecking your life, and to have meetings with senior executives explaining why they're saying no. Okay? On the flip side, going back to the athletic stuff, we've sort of trained people now to talk more about, we try to get them into a process. When you have the idea, come and talk to security. And we'll try to figure out what bad things could happen, and if there are bad things that can happen, maybe you can engineer stuff into the product that'll fix it. Explain how when you have a test up, let us look at the test, let us look at the development environment, let us look at something or other before you get to the point that a no is a difficult no. Maybe we can make some suggestions, maybe you can adopt some of them, maybe you can't. So one of the interesting things we've been having in athletics is sort of the automation of everything. It's really weird. People want to automate light switches. They want to automate the sprinkler system. They want to automate everything. This has been going on in our athletics department right now. And initially it was just sort of happening. And then somebody in IT said, you should go talk to security. And they started coming to us and they were really bored. They were like, somebody said we should talk to security. And we're just putting in a sprinkler system. And I don't understand, and this is really a waste of time. And it was like, where's the sprinkler system? Well, it's in the middle of the football field. And what are you going to do with the sprinkler system? Well, we're going to log on and we're going to turn on the sprinklers. And I was like, that's okay. So what happens if there's a game and somebody from MIT logs on and turns on the sprinklers in the middle of the game and we're on national TV? And they were like, that's not too good. Like, so maybe there's a security problem with the sprinkler system. And maybe there isn't. We should talk about this. Right? And it was the same thing with the lights.
And you think security is going to help you. You don't know the MIT.
Some guy came in from the light switch system, one of the names you see on the light switches that you flip all the time, and they're like, we're going to sell you these secure light switches, and you're going to use them to turn the lights on and off inside the athletic stadium, inside the indoor stadium. And I was like, so can somebody else log on and turn off the lights in the middle of a nationally televised game? And they were like, oh, I guess so. And I was like, so you should talk to security. It doesn't, on the face of it, look like a problem, and I'm not trying to be a no person, but you try to think of what bad thing could happen. And on the face of it, the guys developing these lighting systems are, their customers call and say, it's a real pain in the butt. I'm a facilities guy. Somebody calls me up in the middle of the night and says, basketball practice is running late and the lights just went off because they're on a timer. Can you turn them back on? And the guy's at home and he has to get in the car and come in, and it's a pain. So we want a way to do this from home. And so allow anyone on the internet to connect to the system and turn on the lights. And it seems like a good idea on the face of it to the facilities guys, but they just aren't thinking about the bad guys.
Well, every time you add an IP address to something, it just adds the complexity. I mean, look at things like Stuxnet and the things that in infrastructure where people said it couldn't be done. The obstacles to good security are typically complexity, change, and as Dave was alluding, unintended consequence. But earlier, Bill had said, and I like the term that he used, or if he didn't use it, this is what I heard him say, thinking about risk tolerance and what is the potential risk of this event occurring, and then organizationally, what is our risk tolerance for dealing with that? And I'd like to go back to Bill. I mean, you've had a role as a CIO for a major corporation. You've advised lots and lots of other corporations. How do you go about that conversation to identify what the risks are, to make people aware of them that are the business people, not the middle-level technologists, and then arrive at a risk tolerance that you then figure out how much security you need?
Yeah, I think it's pretty procedural. You get the right group to get. Probably the hardest part are getting the right people together to do that, because it's not clear who the right people are, because those people don't have that title or clear responsibility yet. But it's around enterprise management and company corporate management. It's maybe around legal. It's maybe around the CFO. But you get those people together. You spend some time understanding what the opportunity is associated with the innovation. You understand who the stakeholders of the assets that are going to be driving that opportunity are, and you have some discussion around what their expectations are around the protection of those assets, and what level of comfort you have in being able to support that set of expectations. You then sort of step back and think through what bad things can happen. So what are the bad scenarios? And then you think through what are the probabilities of each of those occurring, and then you think through what the penalty, the financial penalty or governmental penalty or infrastructure penalty or employee penalty would be if it does happen. And then with that, you step back and take a look at that risk profile and see if you have designed the achievement, the target of the innovation in such a way that it fits within something that you feel comfortable from a risk standpoint. And if you don't, you go back and try to restructure it, redesign it. And if you do, then you bring in the security professionals whose job it becomes to figure out how you manage that, what the metrics are, what the appropriate controls are, and understand how those are going to change over time, and then implement that set of controls. So it's a separation of the discussion from a business discussion up front, and then a technology discussion after the business discussion results in a clear profile or tolerance that you're interested in.
And this is why I wanted you to be on the panel. I mean, this is exactly what needs to take place. If your risk tolerance is what it says in a security textbook, you've missed the whole point. I remember when my first job as a CISO, I met with a senior executive, Thompson, and I went in with all this information. He said, if all you're going to tell me is I have to do everything that's in that book, you're wasting my time. Your job is to understand what our business is, to understand what our risk tolerance is, and then help me do the 20% that gets us the 80% of the risk mitigation, not just dot every I and cross every T. Sometimes you can't do that, though, in a highly regulated place. John, why don't you talk to us about the Grc Framework? Because we always say there's 3 R's in risk: regulations, revenues, and reputation. And the revenues and the reputation, you can make a subjective decision of what your risk tolerance is. You can't always do that with regulation. So tell us about your Jsc Framework.
Well, we have a very large set of control matrices for the various regulations that we use. So you described, there's probably about 1,000 different iterations for an individual project. So say your project has use by the investment community, so you have broker-dealers, you have a different set of higher-level requirements that have to be adhered to for that particular business segment. We typically have to do a lot of things by those segments, so you know basically who the broker-dealer population is, which businesses support those folks and are under the same rules. And we have to sort of play everything through a set of filters, and that's why I was talking about the different business risk tolerances. They're decidedly different. So sometimes we can get away with doing something in the Devonshire portfolio companies that we would never be able to do the same way in the core companies.
So does that stifle innovation in the regulatory space?
Sometimes it creates these differences of opinion on what the regulators mean, and no one really wants to go back and ask the regulator, okay, what did you mean by you need to monitor social networking, right? Well, you know, what specifically would you see us doing? So sometimes we're subject to doing some interpretation. Sometimes we can reach out, get some guidance, or go to a session where we might have a FINRA talking about that particular control set or something like that. But it's much more of an art than a science to try to understand and position. So I guess it'd be similar to getting advice from a lawyer. So the lawyer tells you what clearly is against the law and what clearly is according to the law, and then there's sort of gray area in between, and they kind of try not to advise you, you know, but here are the factors that are out there. And a lot of these security decisions need to be made the same way. You know what clearly is not allowed. You know, the lack of supervision, the capability to monitor a broker-dealer. You know you need to have that capability for communications like email. How are you going to implement that? So, you know, you get a new technology in, it's email-enabled, inevitably everything is, right? Do you shut off that capability? Do you monitor that capability? You know, and what's the cost of it? So we really start with the controls filters. What things do we have to have in place? There are some that are given higher priority, and then we need to say, okay, when it comes out and says we need to have this set of control, what is the cost to put that in place? And does it make this technology not cost effective? So I think sometimes security professionals get the reputation for having killed a project when all they've said is, well, in order to take the technology and make it safe for use for our company, we've added back all these controls, and because the developer of that technology didn't include them, and you need to add them back in, you now have something that's really not cost effective. You might as well use the standard supported technology because it's actually cheaper and it has all those pieces built in. And I mean, those become difficult conversations, and you've got to manage those politically. But you know, the mechanism, it's a pretty straightforward process. It's just the hard part is when people are involved in perceptions and all these things we know very well. Managing that process is difficult.
Dave, have you ever had any of those risk tolerance conversations at the Boston College with any of the senior leadership?
We're moving in that direction. It's an interesting topic because a lot of the things at Boston College aren't necessarily, that are big risks, aren't necessarily related to IT risks. So it's a difficult and interesting conversation. I mean, essentially it's a 150-year-old institution. The core model is you bring students on campus and you put a professor in front of them and you teach them. And there's nothing intrinsically technological about that. We could have all sorts of technological issues and all sorts of technological risks, but they aren't fundamental to causing the business to break, as it were. And there are other things that could happen that could cause that particular business to break, in a more significant kind of a way. But what we are trying to move toward is assigning the risks and responsibility to people more explicitly. Because there are a number of universities who have discovered that they have much better luck getting people to do security things and build security in if they say, well, if the regulators object or if it's in the paper or whatever, it's not going to say the company had a problem. It's going to say so-and-so at the company had a problem. And once they do that once or twice, all of the people who are perfectly happy to ignore security while hiding behind the corporate thing don't want to hide behind, well, Dennis Devlin, the head of the research division, had bad security and it cost Brandeis a lot of money.
Yeah, that's a joke. We always tell people that ROI doesn't mean return on investment, it's risk of incarceration. And it's you. It isn't necessarily the institution.
Yeah, but the whole corporate, model of sort of spreading responsibility onto this legal entity doesn't work in terms of people assuming risk and balancing risk and innovation. And there is a model in at least some universities of pushing at least the reputational risk back out to people and saying, fine, go do the innovation, and if you don't pay attention to this stuff, it's going to be your name in the papers along with ours, and that causes them to think differently. You don't have to say no to them. You just say do whatever you want, and they do the right thing.
Accountability works wonders, yeah. Innovation is about differentiating yourself, being unique in the marketplace. Bill, as a serial entrepreneur and now with Mobiquity, can can security ever be a differentiator? Can it never be something where that will make a product or service, you know, shine and stand apart from others?
Oh, sure. I mean, it's expected as part of some. So I think the issue people have is never a backlash around security. It's a backlash around the process for establishing security.
Right.
And it's never, not even necessarily a backlash against people saying no. Maybe it's more a backlash of when people say no. How early in the process do they say no versus when there's something defined that they need to manage to, and when they say no then. So absolutely, there are most products that consumers deal with will have a significant component of that where people think that security is a differentiator. Absolutely.
Okay, John, with Fidelity, I mean, I'm a Fidelity customer myself. Are there ever any temptations to tout the security of your product offerings as a differentiator, or highlight to people all of the things that you're doing to help keep them secure?
I think we take a very sort of low profile. I mean, we have certain privacy and regulatory requirements to disclose. Reality is we do a lot more than we say. We do, definitely on the monitoring front, because when money moves out the door, we cover it. Mm-hmm. So we're taking on a lot of that risk ourselves. Therefore, we make significant investments in trapping and blocking fraudulent activities on accounts. It's a very significant investment, and a lot of newer technologies. And we've got very close relationships with folks like the FBI and CERT organizations. I'm actually the Fidelity representative to the Critical Infrastructure Protection Group out of Treasury in DC, so we've got a lot of direct tie-ins there. We try to sort of adhere to the minimum standards of the industry with regards to our discussions of security and risk procedures. That said, I think we've been a little bit more open to talking to clients more. We've been preparing FAQs and things for the folks in the field to talk to our customers about security. We have done sort of fairly significant call campaigns where we find that there are issues on client machines, and that's something that is becoming a lot more prevalent. But we tend to be, pretty conservative about our posture from a security perspective.
And the flip of that, and I totally agree with that, because I think the more vocal you are about how secure you are, the more of a target you become to be attacked. Most companies, that as soon as they create a security practice, that's when everybody who wants to show that they can hack into anything will target that area. So I think thinking about it the way I would think about it, which is have those capabilities built in, but be sort of conservative in how vocally you tout them.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's just one quick thing. I would say when I was CISO of Investors Bank and Trust, where we were trying to really establish a level of trust with our high-end customers there, we talked a lot more about security practices, because it was really part of what the clients were asking for were good, world-class security procedures and risk management. That said, in those scenarios, it was more appropriate to really talk about it. And I know for a fact, when I was at Investors, we won numerous clients based on that security risk and proactive risk management sort of culture of that.
Okay, with the exception of our colleague from MITRE, who likened us to the southern terminus of the alimentary canal.
I love security.
Yeah, I can tell. I'd like to open it up to everyone else. If you have questions, yes, Rob.
Hopefully this isn't too controversial, but all through the discussion, several times it was mentioned, go talk to security, or you should have talked to security, or next time talk to security. Yet, by the same token, Bill said that the issues really are not that security is there, but when it was established. It seems to me to have that come up so much is far too passive to be effective for a security organization. Yeah. Go talk to security.
The panelist or the moderator is not supposed to speak, but I have to say something about that. You're absolutely right. I mean, security has to be a lot more proactive in terms of reaching out, getting with senior leadership, and educating them about risk and risk tolerance, and has to be an integral part of the thought process. If you're an afterthought, you're always going to have the bolt-on that we've always had.
Yeah,
John?
I mean, I agree with that, but there are certain cultures that I've worked in, two organizations that were very security conscious. You didn't even want to bring things to you because they were afraid of the hammer coming down. And I think that's wrong too, right? You want people to be able to float new ideas and bring things back and forth. You want to be there at the table with the businesses that are making certain decisions, and be a party to that. I've been involved in a lot of due diligence efforts with regards to outsourced providers. And that's, I would be horrified if a business, and I would be insulted if the business went out there and started doing these things without having somebody from my team involved in that process to make sure we had the proper controls in place so that you put something online and it's going to be in good shape, as opposed to, we don't really know if that's secure or not.
Right, Gordon?
I think there's a real opportunity. I think the best days of security lie ahead of us, and I think the reason is I think that we are moving into an era of fundamental re-architecting of business and the underlying business processes. So, have you ever seen the security people working with the business process improvement group to actually sculpt securable business practices? So you are actually not a bolt-on, or you're actually part of the path to progress, if you will. I mean, and it actually makes your job easier, makes their job easier. They understand that, because everybody now is sort of saying, when were these processes invented?
Right.
And they weren't invented for this world with mobility, weren't invented for the world with cloud, weren't invented for the world of user-created content, certainly were not invented for the world for social media. And so it's almost like a do-over. So, don't get it wrong this time.
It really is. Dave?
It's a valid point, but I think your security organization should make sure that they're appropriately accessible and should do some reaching out, but security ought to be part of rolling something out. I mean, if you're actually innovating something for the sake of argument in a classical model, at some point you're going to need to market it, you're going to need to sell it, you're going to need to manufacture it. There are just a whole bunch of things you do. And you don't have people, coming down the hall every 6 months saying, "Hi, I'm from marketing. Have you innovated anything I can market that I need to be aware of?" If there's a process in your company for moving an innovation from the point that it's a light bulb above someone's head to marketability, security ought to be in that process. And if there's a process in your organization where you move things into some sort of pilot stage, similarly, security ought to be in that process. But security needs to make itself part of the organizational development and product development and things like that, and just not a separate issue. And we, at least at BC, we try very hard to publicize our existence and make it easy to get a hold of us and to go out and talk to people and educate people, but we can't go around and poll people either, really. You sort of need to make yourself available and hope that people avail themselves of the opportunity.
Bill?
Yeah, I maybe get into the difference between security and risk. It's just, I think security almost conjures up someone who's going to say no, and someone's going to have a technical conversation with you. I think when you're, and I think when you're trying to re-engineer a business process, it's a business discussion, and the objective isn't to say no, it's to say why or why not. And there's a different role there, or a different hat you wear there, which is a risk role rather than a security role.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with that. And again, the moderator's not supposed to speak, but I don't care.
Where's that rule right now?
To follow on to the point that Bill was making, somebody made the point earlier about security not knowing about new technology, new innovation, and so forth. And often security also doesn't know about what's going on in the enterprise. One of the best ways that works for us is we have an Information Security Advisory Council. We meet every month. It's a cross-section of mid-level executives across the entire enterprise. So every major function is represented. And most of the meeting is listening. Most of the meeting is discussing what's going on in different areas. And to Bill's point, people start thinking in terms of risk and start thinking, we're doing this. The development office is now taking money this way. Is there any risk associated with that? Students in enrollment are thinking of communicating with students in a different way. Is there any risk? Are there privacy implications? And once people start thinking that way, then you're not kind of an afterthought. You're part of the thought process itself. But as a security person, you have to get out there and make that happen. You can't wait for people to come to you.
So
I said I wasn't going to let you
I know. So I'm speaking
Go ahead.
anyways. Following to Rob's thing, it's still too passive, right? Mid-level managers meeting together, that's all great, and it's great. But really, what is the security innovation program, right? What are you doing to allow IT or other services to innovate, right? To provide the interlock brake system, rather than us saying, are you going to come up with the, because we're not going to know what the interlock brake system looks like, but coming in and saying, here's some paradigms of securing your application. Here's some new architectures to look at for these things. And I think, where's your innovation program?
Well, and it depends. And again, I'll throw out an example. When I was at Thompson, we did a lot with web services. Okay. Well, if you're doing software that way, you can develop secure web services, which, when you assemble them, yield a secure product. And there are things where you could make those sort of inroads. Personally, I've never been able to make those kind of inroads with the most senior product managers and so forth, but we're working on it. I'll defer to my colleagues and see if they have.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are the push in security. I don't know if you're familiar with Cloud Security Alliance. So there's been a group of CISOs and knowledgeable industry folks working with cloud providers to actually come up with a set of specs and requirements for cloud services. So, I mean, it gets the industry as a whole is really trying to get much better at this. It's still hard. There's a lot of complexity, and especially when you have a network of internal and external providers that you're dealing with. Your complexity. I mean, your security designs are going to get a whole lot more complex than they've been in the past. So, I think it is getting more challenging to get good security in an overall system, but that's why some of these consortiums and forums are going to be much more important in terms of driving into those providers. I know I've talked to also a lot of security vendors saying, don't come talk to me if you don't have a strategy for dealing with security in the cloud, because that's where a lot of our data is going to be, not maybe next year, but long term. Well, the majority of companies' data will be in these outsourced data centers, specialized in different computing platforms. We're going to need to be able to solve that, so let's start working on it now. I know that Dave Cullinane and some folks at the RSA conference were talking in detail about that. I know Art Coviel and some other folks are deeply into that area. But I think those are opportunities where we can really show some leadership. Get out there in front and enable the business and IT to get it right the first time, as you said, or the second time.
Bill?
So, yeah, again, my point is different than that. There are two dialogues that should go on. One is around what are the right business trade-offs to make between innovation and what risk tolerance are you looking at. And the other is around what specific controls that are best practice should I implement. And I'm not sure the business people care about that second dialogue. And so I don't think they want people who are going to attend whatever CISR or whatever showing up and telling me what the most important new controls are. I don't care about that. As long as I can have a conversation that has nothing to do with that focuses on what do you need to protect and how strongly. And so I think that's where you're proactive, not on the back end.
I'd say I think you need to be proactive on both fronts, but having an industry leadership group that's defining good standards for the technologies will help you be able to implement that when you need to.
Yeah, I should have said proactive with the business.
Okay.
I think you should be proactive by yourself with that. But I don't think you need to bring that to business people to make sure they're educated and controlled.
But the financial services environment, I mean, not all financial institutions have the same security, right? But the financial institutions environment is basically, the industry said, we will not compete on security. Because we don't want to scare the animals, right? You know, I mean, you know, because I'm saying you'd be crazy if you put in state street. And the thing is, like, you know, basically, you know, or something like that, right? Whereas fidelity is very, very solid, but you choose not to compete on that basis.
One, I mean, I think you're going to see more and more federal work. You know, the cybersecurity legislation that's coming through, you know, House and Senate over the last couple of years. You're going to see this regulated.
Right.
So, you know, what's in place now for financial services, you're probably going to see in other segments by federal mandate required, you know, around privacy. So, I mean, I think it's just a matter of time before.
But then now you're raising the question. I mean, regulation versus how fast the hacker tribe moves. I gotta take the hacker tribe. They're probably moving a little quicker than the regulators.
The only thing I'd say is, in most of the things that I've run into, when somebody comes to you and says, "How can I secure this?" There are multiple ways of approaching that problem. There are multiple ways of securing it. So, if you want help innovating and your security person's actually any good, if you come to them early enough and say, "I've got this thing, I want to secure it," they ought to be able to work with you and figure out how you can secure it in a fashion that's not going to slow down your innovation and may even improve your innovation. I've certainly run into people who don't do that, who say you have to do everything in some checklist or compliance list or something or other, but that is a problem I think you run into in areas other than security, you know, when you're trying to implement something as well.
But I think that's the point we're trying to make, is that there's real opportunity for you to rebrand yourself. Because security, really, you guys are the smart guys. You understand both Silicon Whisperer, you understand the business, this type of thing. But to go forward initiatives, you have to be involved in that.
Right.
Right now, you're just carrying the cop card versus you can also be the improvement, the path forward guy.
Well, you hit the nail on the head before when you said talking about process. I mean, if you think of people, process, and technology, for the longest time we focused on the technology, right? But the business processes, the opportunity. I don't want to sound like the friends at MIT and the paving cow paths and all that, but a lot of our business processes, especially at old institutions, are cow paths. And looking at them, re-engineering them, redacting as much sensitive information as possible. I'm presenting to the faculty next week on this exact topic. You know, we have these bastions of repositories of sensitive information all over the place, and you can't lose what you don't have. And if we can get rid of a lot of those things, not collect a lot of those things in the first place, it dramatically reduces the attack surface. I'd like to close asking each of the panelists. I think I already know Dave's answer because I think he gave it, but if you could give each person here an actionable idea to take away regarding balancing innovation and security, what would that be? We'll start with Dave and work our way across.
I guess the main thing I would say is if you're trying to balance innovation and security, you can innovate without security, but you're going to get into trouble if your innovation is successful and you give them security no consideration whatsoever. So even if your innovation initially isn't as secure as you'd like it to be, if you've thought about how it could be made secure in the future, it's going to be a heck of a lot easier. I mean, people talk about bolt-on security, and I'm okay with bolt-on security as long as there's something to bolt it onto. It's just really hard when you're trying to bolt it on and there's no bolt holes.
John?
I guess my suggestion is you know, a simple outreach, like 10 questions that you give to project managers that help them evaluate whether they might have a security-sensitive project. Because I think a lot of the challenges is you've got a lot of different projects going on, different parts of the business, and it's hard for you to be there for every single one. So if people know, you know, the 10 situations where they really should be consulting somebody from a security perspective, your chances they're going to do that are much higher. And the security practitioner, you know where those are. Large amounts of sensitive data, external connection, things like that. And then do a good job at getting that into the project managers and the development group's hands and to the business users and just sort of rallying around that and then supporting that while on the back end. I think that's probably the most simple and effective thing that you can do to improve security across the enterprise. I mean, it's very basic, but it applies with any technology.
And the last word from Bill.
I just say, remember the difference between risk and security, and that there really are two different conversations, but try to keep both conversations as business friendly as you can.
And I do want to give a warning too. I'm going to get an attendee list from Joanna if anything happens to our lights or sprinklers.
You're going to be the first to be visited.
We'll be spoofing MIT.
Thank you all very much.